Inner peace is not the absence of chaos or conflict, it's the acceptance of it.
Akshay Nanavati is a former Marine, polar explorer, and the author of Fearvana.
I had come back from the war, get my master's in journalism so I could go back to war. I went and did this 1 month crossing of Greenland, dragging a 190-pound sled for 350 miles across the world's second largest ice cap. I didn't know I was doing this, but I was doing it to run away from stillness.
Those guys just smoke weed.
Once I was back in the normal world, there was none of that intensity. I struggled with PTSD, depression. I was drinking a full bottle of vodka a day. I was on the verge of taking my own life. That was the moment that began the climb out of the abyss. Stop demonizing suffering, stop demonizing fear. All of these forces can be an access point to bliss and to greatness. If you're on the edge of survival, you just need to get out of pain. Forget about obviously seeking out more suffering. And that could honestly mean at the time, if I'm 1 day sober, stacking that win. Finding what I would call joy islands. Happiness is not the thing to seek. It's a side effect of pursuing meaning, of seeking connection, and you will develop it. There's two pathways that create a fulfilled, happy life. It's purpose and connection. So finding your meaning, your, what I call in Fearvana, your worthy struggle. There was a time for me that fun was my struggle. I saw a sign that said 5K fun run, and I had visceral disgust at the idea of a fun run. You don't run for fun. But that was a deeply flawed way of thinking. If you look at the duality of pain and pleasure, pleasure was my thing that I struggled with. True peace, true freedom is not about resisting or clinging to one side, but embracing both. The next step is exploring both. Because if you stay doing what you've always done, you'll keep getting what you always got.
I want to talk about your trip across Antarctica.
I lost 2 fingers to frostbite.
Let me just, for people who aren't familiar with your story, I'm going to just a brief little intro just to land it, and then we'll get right into the good stuff.
Sounds good.
All right. Akshay Nanavati is a former Marine, ultra runner, polar explorer, so rad, and the author of Fearvana. After overcoming PTSD, addiction, and suicidal depression, he's dedicated his life to exploring the sacred relationship between suffering and bliss. Oof. So rare to have someone be able to marry those things. So I'm so excited to have you here. It's really just such a blessing. And whether dragging a sled across an Arctic ice cap or sitting in his own darkness, Akshay's work invites us to turn towards fear, not conquering it. I got truth bumps right there saying that, but to find freedom through it. Brother, I mean, seriously, like there's a lot of, let's just call it men's, a lot of people doing great men's work. Mm-hmm. The sense I get yours is that next level that like once we do this work here, which is great and necessary and foundational, because you can't just jump to this stuff. You've got to go through the crucible, which we're going to hear a lot about your story. And people who've listened to the podcast know a bit about mine, but I love that this is your life's work and you've experienced it in many ways that are really challenging, obviously, to say the least.
Yeah, it's been a beautiful journey.
Yeah, and I can just feel like the blessings in all of it, right? That whole like, this really sucks, this is really bad, well, maybe, right? And just holding that there's something on the other side, and you're a living example of that. So again, it's such an honor to have you on here today, and
thank you.
And blessed to
be here.
Yeah. Now, I think a perfect place to start is this shirt you just gifted me.
Yeah.
So let me just hold it up for people who are watching on YouTube, and maybe you could share a bit about it.
Yeah. So the primary image there is the logo of Fearvana, which is the yin yang and an F. And on the left side, the upper left, is a samurai with the reason you see kind of the coding there, or a chip, represents what I call the human brain, which is the prefrontal cortex. So that's our consciousness. And the right side, the tiger, in my book, Fearvana, I call it the animal brain, which is our limbic brain. And this is the battle that we all face between what we consciously seek, what we consciously hope for, versus the subconscious that can hold us back until we've mastered it. And so within that battle, on the back of the shirt, it says, "Forged by the fires of the eternal war within the self, a warrior will rise." And the idea, the ethos is going to war, embracing that war within, as opposed to running from it. You know, we all experience inner conflict. Yes. It's part of the human experience. But the whole ethos is that inner peace is not the absence of chaos or conflict. It's the acceptance of it. And step 1 is embracing it. Step 2 is seeking it out at the next evolution as a means to your next awakening, your next evolution.
Oof. I feel like I don't want to say mastered, but I feel very comfortable with the embracing part. I feel like, and I just came through a period in my life that was definitely periods of darkness with some light in there, as there always is, if we pay attention, and into this greater clarity about all the things in my life, in particular starting with self, and then with my wife, Peyton, and, you know, we're about to celebrate 25 years. And as I said, my daughter is about to graduate. And so what that feels like is very different than it has in the past. And it's very, I can imagine. It's something I've wanted and craved, but haven't been able to feel it. And I feel like going through my journey, you know, over the last 2 to 3 years has kind of broken away that crust or whatever it is that's allowed me to connect to me and kind of what I'm here to do, and how she has really shown up as my guru, as my teacher. And didn't often look at it that way. You know,
when you're in it, sometimes it's a little harder. I get it.
Sometimes she showed up as my dad in whatever representation that was. But that was, I did always seem to hold that was my work to do. And I didn't always act that way. But when I would, you know, really kind of feel into it, it's like, okay, if not her, there's going to be someone else that's going to bring this up for me. And so who do I want to spend the rest of my life with? Who do I want to have be my teacher in a sense? I'm certainly partner, right? And co-create. But anyway, I just love, this orientation to that type of work. And I'm curious, because a lot of us have had those times that are pretty dark, and we're not ready to, or we don't have the tools to face those things. And I know in my case, I can distract and numb. It can be substances. That's obviously the first thing that people think of, but it can also be with working out. It can be with social media. It can be with going down deep rabbit holes with conspiracies. And that can be useful, you know, but I felt like I was there in the fall, and it was amazed. I was amazed at how many rabbit holes I got and how deep. And I was like just carrying a lot of density at that point. And now when people share things that are of that ilk, I don't have time for it. You know, I feel like I've done my research. I kind of know how I feel about those things. And it's like, it's onward and upward. And so what do you say to, you know, the men and women out there who just, they're not ready to kind of face, they don't know how to hold the darkness.
I mean, when you are in those depths of the abyss, and I myself have been there, as you briefly read in my bio, after struggling from the war, after coming back from the war, I struggled with PTSD, depression. I was drinking a full bottle of vodka a day, literally a full bottle. I would go on for days on end until I couldn't take it anymore, sober up, kind of keep going through this pattern till eventually, after one morning, 5 days of binge drinking, I was on the verge of taking my own life. I was seconds away from slitting my wrists.
Can you take us back to that moment?
So I had just woken up. I still remember it vividly after binge drinking for all night, and it had continued on for a few days.
Were you by yourself?
By myself. I was with my ex-wife at the time, and she was upstairs. I was downstairs at my old home in New Jersey, and woke up and walked over to the kitchen. I was tired of this pattern that I had gotten myself into of drinking. I would drink for days on end, recognize I'm doing something terrible, sober up for maybe weeks, sometimes months.
Were you working during this time? Like, what was like the day to day?
Well, I guess to step back a little bit, right after I finished grad school, I got my master's in journalism. I had a corporate job for a year and a half, hated it, quit my job and skied across Greenland for a month. I did a 1 month crossing of Greenland. But to your point about what you said earlier about sometimes even the positive things we do are simply a way of running away from ourselves. And at the time, I did that just to run away. I had come back from the war. I even went to grad school to actually get my master's in journalism so I could go back to war as a combat journalist. I wanted to return. There's something paradoxically peaceful about such an intense experience. In war, in moments like that, you see humanity without the masks. You see the rawness of the human experience. And that means you'll see the worst, but you'll also see the best. You'll see people in war, for example, you see people do horrific things to each other. But you'd also see people who are willing to put their lives on the line for you. And in that intensity, in that rawness of that experience, you get to see the human condition at its most extreme, without all the filters, without the masks, without the constructs through which we operate in normal life to operate in civilization.
Is this common for people to have this experience, or do you think this is a bit rare where you're in that, you feel that, see that, and you want to go back because that is like such a visceral feeling, and because that can be a lot for someone to hold, right? Too much.
I think it is one of the reasons why veterans struggle a lot, but it's not a reason often mentioned, because it's a weird thing to say war is peaceful. But if you look at it, it meets so many of the human needs. Separate from the politics of the war, we shouldn't have gone in. I studied the hell out of this. I wrote my history thesis on it. We shouldn't have gone in. There were a lot wrong. But on the ground, we really did want to help. We were doing something meaningful. The Iraqis even told us that I feel sorry Americans have to pay in blood for Iraqi freedom. So we were trying to do something good. So you're doing something noble. You have camaraderie. You're fighting with your brothers in arms. So talk about community, community at the highest level. So you're doing something meaningful. You got community. Your volume of life is dialed up when you have to ponder your own mortality in an intense environment. So the life is dialed up at an extremely high, intense level. You have structure. So you don't have the burden of what to think about, of freedom in a way, because structure is provided. Don't get me wrong. Sometimes you absolutely hate it when you're really tired and you don't want to go on mission. Yeah. But at the same time, in this world, you have to think about what to do. And if you don't have clarity, if you don't have discipline, if you don't have structure, it's very easy to fall by the wayside, to let your demons consume you. Yeah. You don't have that luxury of freedom to think, of pondering the existential meaning of life, so to speak, right? So all of these human needs are being met in a very intense environment, and you come back and you're thrust in a normal world. I remember when I first came back, you go into a store, I couldn't just pick up a bottle of water and leave. Oh yeah, I got to start paying for things again. You don't think about that. And I would wake up and be like, oh yeah, I don't need my rifle on me 24/7. Wow. So a lot of those adjustments, and yes, there's other things, but I think that's one of the core reasons why a lot of people struggle back, at least for me. And I didn't know this at the time. Over the years, I've developed a lot more self-awareness, studied a lot of it, confronted my own demons in some very intense ways to recognize what was happening and what was drawing me back to war. And when wars died down, and at the time I met my ex-wife, so that's why I was like, all right, being a war journalist is not conducive to a family lifestyle. So I had continued my path, had gotten into outdoor adventures already. And so I went and did this 1 month crossing of Greenland, dragging a 190-pound sled for 350 miles across the world's second largest ice cap. And intense experience. But at the time, once again, I didn't know I was doing this, but I was doing it to run away from stillness, to go back to an intense environment that provides structure. And in that intensity, again, the volume of life is dialed.
Most guys just smoke weed to get away from that stillness. Good God. I love it.
It drew me. I had gotten into outdoor sports at the time after joining the Marines. So this was an extension of that. But when I came back from Greenland, now I've spent a ton of money. I quit my job. I started building a business. I was doing coaching, funnly enough, while I was slowly sinking.
Oh, that sounds like most coaches.
Exactly. I got certified as a life coach and whatnot, and business started to grow. But then once I was back in the normal world, there was none of that intensity that I sought out in these experiences. And slowly but surely, it didn't happen instantly, but first to be drinking on a Friday, then drinking on a Friday and Saturday. And after a few years of this, it became 4 or 5 days. And eventually I think it was around 2014, that's when that rock bottom moment hit. And the thing that got me out of it was just the fact that I even pondered taking my own life. That shocked me, that I had hit such a moment that I literally was looking at a knife about to slit my wrist. And I can't believe I hit that. I can't believe that's what I actually got to. That kind of shocked me out of my stupor. And by no means was it sunshine and rainbows after that. It wasn't a smooth climb out of the abyss. I broke my sobriety a ton. I went into the pit over and over and over again. But that was the moment that began the climb out of the abyss. And it started with research, neuroscience, psychology, spirituality, reframing my whole experience to Fearvana, which ultimately led to my book, Fearvana, which the core ethos of that book is to stop demonizing suffering, stop demonizing fear, stop demonizing trauma even. And all of these forces can be an access point to bliss and to greatness, not a thing that drives us into the pit.
Whoa, yeah, because there's a lot to unpack there.
Yeah.
I'll just start. I'll start anywhere, and I know we'll get where we need to go. Trauma is it's a big word nowadays, for good reason. And I've had a few people talk about it in different ways to try to allow people to not be anchored by it, not to bypass it,
Mhm.
but not be anchored by it. Like,
Mhm.
what is kind of your orientation to that when sitting down with someone who's sharing what their
Mhm.
trauma is?
The fundamental problem with how we approach trauma, before we even get to what to do once it arrives, once we experience it or have to work to heal it, is the relationship we have with it. So I'll give you an example. There was a great researcher, Dr. Martin Seligman. He's one of the leading researchers in the positive psychology movement. I reference him a lot in Fearvana. He's a fantastic researcher. So he went to West Point, the military academy, and he asked cadets, how many of you have heard of post-traumatic stress disorder? No, something like 90% raised their hand. Then he asked them, how many of you have heard of post-traumatic growth? Less than 5%. And the point he was making, and he discusses this, is we've created a paradigm that trauma equals disorder. And if that becomes your reality, that will be your reality. So that's where the problem begins. And that's how I started reframing my own relationship to trauma. It's not something like, and this is going to sound potentially controversial, instead of viewing trauma as something to heal from, because healing implies going back to or returning to normal, instead view it as something to alchemize, to something to transform into something better, to transmutation instead of healing. And what that means is trauma can make you better. Trauma can build you into someone stronger. That adversity can reshape you instead of just healing to go back to normal. And that's what I started doing. You know, I had lost a friend of mine in the war, very close friend of mine. When I was in Iraq, my vehicle drove over an active IED, an active bomb. Some reason, God knows why, it didn't explode. My friend, when he was in Iraq, he drove over an IED, it exploded, he died. How do you sit with that? Why me? Struggled with that a lot. And when I started delving into, after that moment when I hit rock bottom, delving into the research, recognizing that these experiences that we have, yes, I had post-traumatic stress. I was hypervigilant of loud noises. I struggled with survivor's guilt. I couldn't be in crowds. But post-traumatic stress does not mean post-traumatic stress disorder. That label of disorder then creates the self-fulfilling prophecy that that's who I am, that's what I have, that's my identity. And so instead I say, okay, I have this. How can I use it as fuel? So for a long time, what I did was I put a picture of my friend that I lost in the war up on my wall, and it said, this should have been you. Earn this life. Earn it. And it became my fuel. It drove me. That's what helped me sober up. That if I dishonor this life by drinking myself to death, I'm dishonoring his life. I'm dishonoring life itself. This thing that I've been gifted. I don't know why I lived and he didn't, or I don't know why I was blessed with the life that I have. I was born to good parents. There's many in the world who are born into the darkest corners of hell. I've seen it. I've worked with survivors of sex trafficking, former child soldiers, people in poverty, volunteered and done humanitarian work in post-conflict zones. And you see the darkest corners of the earth and how much people suffer. I was blessed to good parents. I don't know why that is. I don't know if there is an answer to why that is. But what I do know is that it is dishonoring life itself if I waste it. And so using that as fuel, recognizing that it is not a disorder, it is an opportunity. It's an opportunity to be of service, to make my life better. And that was the reframe. It was stop shaping this construct of my identity as someone who has disorder. Because when that happens is anytime something happens, oh, it's because there's something wrong with me. It's what I call, I reference this in the book in Fearvana, what Buddha said, we're all stabbed by the two darts of suffering. This is what I call in the book, second dart syndrome. So the first dart is the thing we don't control. So let's say I stub my toe against a wall. That's the first dart. My toe hurts. The second dart is the self-dialogue we go into our head after that thing happens. What's wrong with me? Why do bad things only happen to me? God hates me. This, that, and the other thing. And we can all relate to that spiral, right? And the first dart is not just external, it's internal as well, because we don't control most of what happens in our brain. Someone cuts me off when I'm driving. Oh, I could murder that guy. Does that mean that's who I am? No, that thought arose, right? For whatever reason, shaped by paradigms in our past. So the thought arose. But as soon as you stop that spiral, because if you don't, it goes on autopilot and it's usually negative. It's the psychologists call it the negativity bias, right? So it'll go into that spiral of what I call second dart syndrome. But as soon as you recognize it, you pause. Now you are seizing the reins. You are seizing the reins of the second dart. And the same thing applies to trauma. So I was hypervigilant of loud noises. I didn't control that, not initially, because I spent 7 months in a war zone where loud noises meant death. That's not a disorder to now be hypervigilant. That's a very normal human response to war. So instead of labeling it as a second dart called disorder, got it. Hey, let me be with this. Pause. That's uncomfortable, but the only way out is through. The only way out is through. So the more I learned to be with it and shift it into gratitude. I used to go into New York City and I couldn't stand the crowds in New York City. And I started looking, just things to appreciate. Look at the person who built the building, the amount of people there that came together to build this magnificent structure. Even the sidewalk the amount of human beings that came together for this moment in time for me to be here is unreal.
Wow.
When you think about that, I mean, look at this.
Yeah.
The amount of things that came together for you and me to be sitting here.
Yeah.
When you put that in your consciousness, it reframes your experience of reality. And soon over time, I got more comfortable because you're channeling your consciousness to redirect it. And in time, you're changing even the first start that arises in response to external stimuli.
Was there, I know there were a lot of things that kind of helped shepherd you into this new experience of life, but was there any, like you referenced Buddhism, is that at the very core of kind of what allowed you to let go of these old stories?
I would say that is the core of it. I don't know if I would ascribe that label to myself, but if I had to, the one religion, the philosophy that I abide most by is Buddhism. And again, I take from all of the learnings and kind of shape it into my own experience of reality. But definitely the realization of awakening that own inner Buddhahood that we all have within us, call it your Buddhahood, call it God, consciousness, whatever it may be. That's the fundamental experience. And I think however you put it, I believe that is what we're all seeking to some degree or the other.
So for people who aren't familiar with it, like what would you say is the kind of elevator pitch about why you were so drawn to it and why it's had such an impact for you?
The core of it, I mean, in Buddhism, they say life is suffering, right? So it starts with the acceptance of the isness of suffering.
Okay.
And that over time, I've realized more and more, the acceptance of isness is the foundation to freedom from all unnecessary suffering. The thing that creates unnecessary suffering is resistance or clinging. And this is a big element in Buddhism, is the resistance and clinging. It's just stopping that to accept what is. And you do this so I'll give you an example on my polar expeditions. When there's soft snow, dragging two sleds through soft snow is very, very, very hard. And if I had hard snow, it'd be much easier. Now, I could say I wish for hard snow. Instead, what I would practice saying, and I'm not saying I'm perfect. There were some days I really wanted hard snow because it really sucked. But very often I would say things like, thank God for these perfect conditions. Because everything is perfect in its isness, because it cannot be anything other than what it already is. Everything is perfect in its isness because it cannot be anything other than what it already is. Mm-hmm. So instead saying, thank you, God, for these perfect conditions. Acceptance of isness. And it's the same thing with our internal response, that hypervigilance of loud noise. Instead of demonizing it, accept it. There was a woman once who called in. I was doing a podcast and she called in and she was struggling with PTSD from the Boston bombing. Similar thing, she was hypervigilant of loud noises. And so as we were talking, I said, the next time you find yourself jumping with loud noise, I just want you to pause and just sit with it for a second. She goes, yeah, but that's really hard. I know. And I'm not sort of faulting her. It's understandable. That's a hard thing to go through. But the point is the only way out is through. But the first step is accepting what is, pausing, being with that. And that was one element that drew me to Buddhism. The idea that, and again, we all have our own relationship to God, but in Buddhism, many sects of Buddhism, the divinity is within. It's not sort of a higher power God. It's God is within us. And that also drew me in, that we can tap into something beyond ourselves, recognizing that, tapping into our own divinity. And God to me is an expression of humanity at its finest. God is when we can transcend ourselves in service of something greater. That's self-transcendence. What actually Maslow has listed as the highest in the hierarchy of needs. It's self-actualization in the pyramid you usually see, but what's not as well known is that self-transcendence was higher than self-actualization. And Viktor Frankl even put it more beautifully when he said, self-actualization is the side effect of self-transcendence. So through transcendence, we actually actualize.
So how can people get there with their everyday lives? I mean, not everybody can do a polar expedition. Not that that's exactly how you did it. That's one of the many ways, but.
Well, a pathway through, one of the core ones is suffering, seeking it out, stepping into it. Now, if you're in the midst of survival, needless to say, the situation is somewhat different, right? So what got you here won't get you there. There's different evolutions in the human journey. So it's something that from building from Maslow's hierarchy of needs, I create a framework called the STORM framework. And it's 5 levels in the human evolution. So survival, transformation, optimization, relentless, and mastery. And to get from survival, so this is someone on the depths, like when I was in the verge of suicide, to get from there to just out of there is different than if I'm now playing on the highest edge of mastery. The tools are different, right? So if you're on the edge of survival, you just need to get out of pain. Forget about obviously seeking out more suffering. Like when I was in that core, that's all I needed to do is get out of pain, just briefly. And that could honestly mean at the time, if I'm one day sober, stacking that win, celebrating that, finding what I would call joy islands, moments of glimpses of light, glimmers of hope that you can cling to. Okay, one day I'm sober, 2 days I'm sober, 3 days I'm sober. Slowly but surely you start evolving. So I actually have a series of tools, if it would be helpful, on my Fearvana website where people can find, depending on where they are on their journey, to guide them to that next stage of their evolution. But when I'm on that depth of pain, initially forget about seeking enlightenment, just to get out of pain. And one way to start that process is helping others, finding joy islands, doing a little bit here to stack the wins. And that could be just celebrating that you were sober one day, right? Now, once you're out of that slowly, you seek your path. You find your purpose. If you don't know it, there's different ways to figure that out. We can happily get into, but you find something to pursue, to pursue your meaning. And even research has shown there's 2 pathways that create a fulfilled, happy life. It's purpose and connection. So finding your meaning, your, what I call in Fearvana, your worthy struggle. And I call it that because anything worthwhile will be a struggle. Yeah. So it's not about avoiding it. And my worthy struggle is polar travel, but that doesn't mean it's the only path to fulfillment and enlightenment, right?
And you're not saying you got to struggle the rest of your life. There's moments of ease for sure.
Of course.
But the struggle is paramount in this growth, exploration, and leveling up.
Exactly. And also seeking out struggle is going to be unique for each person. And I'll explain what I mean by that. So there was a time for me that fun, light things was my struggle. I had gone for this run once many years ago, 5-6 years ago, actually more than that. And I saw a sign that said 5K fun run. And I had visceral disgust at the idea of a fun run. You don't run for fun. Every run has to be an exercise in suffering. Every run, an exercise in suffering. But that was a deeply flawed way of thinking. And I realized that I developed such a comfort zone with playing on the edge of suffering that I was bringing it in all areas of my life. And instead finding now the other edge of joy, which over time led to this concept that I now call, and actually in Antarctica, it got crystallized even more, that I call the paradox of oneness. And this to me is the foundational truth in not just Buddhism, but in spiritual seeking and in the human experience. And what this means is the human experience is this dance of opposites. There's masculine, feminine, life and death, light and dark, ego and humility, pain and pleasure, so on and so forth. There's a series of dualities that encompass the human experience. The paradox of oneness is the realization that every 2 of these opposites are not separate, but they are parts of the same whole. And it's our conceptual mind that creates division and separation. But true peace, true freedom, true mastery even, is not about resisting or clinging to one side or to either side, but embracing both. And then, as we said earlier, not just embracing, but the next step is exploring both. And that's how I started finding my peace, that recognizing that. So if you look at the duality of pain and pleasure, pleasure was my thing that I struggled with. When I would go to retreats, people would do like light, playful dances between breaks. I would rather do 100 burpees in the corner than do that because that was my comfort zone.
Mr. Intensity, I love it. Yeah.
So I started playing on that edge.
Yeah.
Because if you stay doing what you've always done, you'll keep getting what you've always gotten.
Yeah.
And we all don't know what we don't know, right?
Yeah.
So you got to go onto the other edge. So at any point in my life, I'm always looking for a duality causing friction. And this is something, even when you were talking earlier about some of the things you're struggling with, like this is one thing that I encourage people to do is find a duality causing you friction and go play on the other edge of it. So even for me, what drew me to the darkness that you mentioned the first time was I was so good at now doing, but I struggled with stillness, just being. So I went into a 7-day darkness retreat. That was my other edge. Let me play on the edge of stillness. And I just sat still with myself for the first time in 7 days. And the second time I did it, 10 days in pitch darkness. Can't see your hand in front of you. Just to be within and to go within.
Bro, you just keep firing away here. Holy shit. What I do love, one of the things that has drawn me to Buddhism is that holding both things.
Non-dualism is, yeah.
We're just not, certainly in the West here, I was not taught that. There's a right and wrong, and you seek out the right and you resist the wrong. And there's so much challenge that comes in that certainty.
Yeah.
And I think when I opened up to curiosity and not knowing,
Yeah.
whoa, life got a lot easier.
Yeah.
And then when I find myself back into that, it's like, oh, what's not okay with me right now, where I'm seeking certainty, where I don't feel safe, or whatever is driving that. It's an indication for me that that's not where I want to live.
Yeah.
It happens to be where I'm at right now. And it's like, can I just be kind enough to myself and, get myself to the next stage?
Yeah. Yeah. Release those second darts when they show up to just, and then seek out a new edge. And in that you'll find, like, that's when you start playing on the other edge, that's how you start realizing that they're two actually parts of the same whole, because you realize you can't have one without the other. When I'm standing on a summit, the only reason I can look down is because there's a valley. If there's no valley, there's no summit, then it's pure flat. And I don't just mean this literally, think about it figuratively in our life. You can't have a high without a low.
No.
You can't have light without darkness. And when I go play on the other edge, I start to see how they're actually parts of the same whole. It's like breathing. It's the heartbeat. I mean, the life itself is an expression of two opposites coming together. There's an exhalation and an inhalation, two opposing forces that create a sum that greater than each individual part. The heartbeat, contraction, expansion, two opposing forces that birth life itself. And that's the essence of Buddhism, of this whole idea of the paradox of oneness, is that when you stop doing that, and how this applies in day-to-day life is when you feel fear, when you feel anxiety, when you feel stress, you release those second darts of suffering and you stop demonizing it. The moment you stop judging the feeling, the experience as good or bad, but recognizing it as part of the greater experience of a whole that transcends each duality, you find so much more peace. And you realize that this thing we're seeking happiness, it's not the elimination of sadness, it's the ability to find the gift in sadness. But you can't have happiness without sadness.
And it's like you just need to sit in the feeling of that.
Exactly.
And just let it be there. Give it space.
Only way out is through. That's the only way you'll find. And Carl Jung put it absolutely perfectly when he says, until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate.
Yeah.
And he also said people will do anything, no matter how absurd, to avoid facing their soul.
Yeah. Been there for sure.
Likewise, brother. Likewise.
I'd love to hear kind of just like share an experience I had.
Yeah.
Because I've had sometimes a hard time articulating what I was experiencing. And I feel like you've been there multiple times. And so, really looking forward to sharing. I was in Las Vegas during the mass shooting in 2017. And, it was in the moment of hiding behind the tour buses with a friend that I just had this sense of a bit of like sadness. Like this wasn't the life I was meant to live. Up until that point, on the outside, looking in, it's like I had the life anybody wanted. I had all the things and great wife, and I realized in that moment that none of that was coming to save me in that moment. And so I've talked about this before, but I didn't have any fear of death. I truly just surrendered. And it was as if like the body, soul, the primal instincts just took over, and there was someone who was kind of directing the little crowd I was with about what to do. And it was just very much almost like matter of fact on point. And it wasn't until I left there that I realized that it was probably a year and a half later that I realized that it had woken something in me, that I was on a deep existential inquiry into what I'm meant to be doing on this earth. And the game I had been playing, while I was grateful for it, was time to play a different game. And I'm curious, because you've been in those life and death situations. You've chosen some, some could say my soul chose that opportunity, but that's neither here nor there. It's just in that moment, it was the awakening I needed to shift things. And I think to your point, I didn't all of a sudden become awakened and have everything figured out, but I knew I was searching for something.
Yeah.
And in that searching, as you know, there's no answers. There's just more inquiry, and there's greater knowing about self, and even that shifts and changes, and there's no kind of final landing place. So just always kind of being in that inquiry and that journey has been, again, amazing for me. It's been almost 8 years now.
Wow.
Obviously very much still on the journey, but it's just, I'm curious about your, like, if you can put words to like what that feeling is when, I had this sense that if someone came around the corner with a gun, we were all done, and so there was why was there no fear in that moment?
I think that's you asked earlier, right? Like, how does one experience that? And I said, suffering. It's when you're confronting your own mortality and deep suffering, it breaks all the illusions, and there's a beautiful surrender. And again, it's paradoxical. It's almost hard to say something horrific can create that, but that's what it does often when you face your own mortality. There's a surrender, and every sense of how you view things, the constructs that have shaped you, it's all gone. The illusion of how we experience reality is gone. And that surrender is why you felt nothing. You felt almost, I wouldn't say bliss, correct me if I'm wrong, but the at least in my own experience and some of those experiences, there's a sense of oneness because you've surrendered everything. And you feel, that's what suffering does, because it's so all encompassing. It's suffering. The nature of it is that it's suffering. It's not feeling good. When you're thrust into an experience like that, where you could die, you could literally die. It doesn't feel good, but that's what breaks down everything. It breaks down the ego. It breaks down our whole sense of reality. And that act of surrender is a sense of oneness. That's actually what draws me to these things in many ways, is these moments of pure oneness with all that is. It's shattering the illusions, shattering the constructs that shape our reality, everything. And you experience life in a very raw experience. It's pure experience without filters.
Yeah. I went home the next day. So I went home on Monday, and that weekend was ACL here, and we had tickets to go, and I was going, and my wife, my kids couldn't understand. How can you go back into a music festival? It's like, first of all, my trader mind went on. I'm like, the odds that people are going to start shooting up fucking music festivals aren't good. And if they do, like, I like my chances, there's a lot of people there. But like, I got home, and my mom happened to be staying with us in Austin at the time. And understandably, like, they couldn't wait to see me, and like, but for me, I didn't feel anything about that. I didn't feel like, thank God I'm alive, or it was just like, it was just very matter of fact. Like, it was a thing that, like, it feels very surreal when I look back on it. Like, fuck, I was there, but it doesn't feel like I was there. Like, how do you explain that? Because it doesn't, I don't know.
Yeah.
Like, I forget to tell people sometimes, like, oh yeah, I was at, and they're like, everybody's like, holy shit. I'm like, it didn't feel like that being there.
It didn't feel like that in that moment right after and since then? Or was there?
Yeah, I mean, I understand what happened, and I know I was there in all that, but I didn't feel like, I guess, the fear that everybody expects one to feel, and the thank God I'm alive, and whoa, that was really a hairy situation. And I mean, on some level, I understand all that, but I don't have, I went and saw counselors afterwards. They're like, you're good. You don't have any PTSD. And
it's hard to say this. Sometimes we go through people will go through different experiences. I've gone through some intense experiences, and completely, I think also a representation of a high degree of mastery is the ability to quickly let go of the past. So even if you look at people from athletes, they have to instantly let go of a bad game, so to speak. And you are clearly a master at your craft. The fact that you're sitting here, you've achieved a great deal of success in life. And so you're able to let go of the past. I've gone through what many would qualify as traumatic experiences that I don't perceive to be traumatic. And I barely noticed them too, to your point. I mean, in 4 years in Antarctica, I lost 2 fingers to frostbite. And I don't even, like, I actually thought about this as my top, it came to the surface when you were mentioning this, as a story that I went through, black fingers, cut off, the fingers, they hurt tremendously, this whole madness. And I was just like, this is a wild story. And now I barely, it's gone. So I think that's partly why. I obviously don't know the ins and outs, and we can happily to delve into it, but I think that's probably partly why is it if you're focused, like even somebody asked me the other day, what's been your favorite adventure? And my answer was the next one.
Yeah.
Right. So the past the past only matters to the degree that it serves you in the present. If you're accessing the past for anything but making you better now, you are wasting your time there. You are absolutely wasting your time there. It's not real. In a very concrete way, it's not real. So in my book, Fearvana, I have a whole chapter dedicated to the neuroscience of how memories work. And memories, the way they work is when you think about it, let's say I'm accessing what I did yesterday or what I did a year ago, which is a better experience. When I'm accessing that memory, it's not actually accessing the memory. You're accessing the last time you accessed that memory. So memories don't work as a sort of a movie screen.
Oh, that's
Every
interesting.
time you access the memory, you're actually rewiring the neuronal structure of that memory. So if you access, this is why sometimes, and not demonizing all forms of therapy, but even the therapy I experienced can lead someone into a deeper spiral. Because if every time you access a memory through a very negative lens of reality, what are you doing? You're rebuilding the memory. And literally on a neuronal level, the memory structure gets altered over time. So memories, and there's a great researcher, Dr. Elizabeth Loftus, who's done studies on this, how she can implant fake memories into people. They even did a study on 9/11. After 9/11 and 5 years later, they asked people about the experience. And not only small things in their memory shifted, but as big things as where they were when that happened completely shifted. So the more you delve into memory, you realize how malleable it is and how fake it is. It's completely an illusion. It's completely an illusion. When you recognize that, you say, okay, if it is an illusion, this can do two things. On the one hand, it can create a sense of nihilism. Who am I? And everything, if nothing is real. And that's not helpful. So the other thing it can do is if it is truly an illusion, if nothing is real, then who cares? I'm going to create whatever reality I want. That's the value there. That's the point of it, is recognizing. And I'll give you a very concrete example of how I did this when I started studying. I would ask myself, what did you eat yesterday? And I'd say, okay, I had this steak. How do you know you ate the steak? Well, I remember. Okay, but you also know, and I'd have this very kind of crazy dialogue with myself, but you also know memories are real. So how do you really know? And I was like, I can see the plate. What does that mean? That plate could mean something else. And the point of this whole dialogue for me to get to the point that I can't 100% say that's what I had. And as if there's even a shred of doubt, got it. Now, all my memory is an illusion. Because firstly, it had to be built on a stack of evidence, right? So first I studied how memories work, recognizing that they're very, very malleable. Now I have stack of evidence, and to show that even when it comes to something as small, I can't 100% say with certainty. So boom. And look, doesn't mean you lie to everybody else. Like if you ask me I'm past, I'm going to tell you with integrity, with honor. But for myself, in my own relationship, I can mend and mold things into how it serves me today. And that's all that matters, because this is what's real. How it served me today in order to create a better tomorrow. That's all that matters.
I fucking love that. And it's so interesting when I think about, like, first of all, side note, I was in South Africa a little over a year ago, and we were doing this whole kind of walking through the wild coast on a buddy's 40th birthday expedition. And we were carrying logs to a bonfire. Yeah. And I had to carry the biggest one, and it was, doing this, and I was stepping down off the last big rock, and I slipped, and it landed on my finger. Really heavy. Damn. Yeah. Landed on my hand was on a rock when it hit. And I literally had to make peace, and I did make peace with, I may lose my finger, because we're out in the middle of fucking nowhere. Yeah. This thing is looking really gnarly, busted up, exploded. Yeah. Now it's fine, but I actually went to bed that night like, what a fucking story. I actually lost part of my finger. Now, again, I didn't have to necessarily experience that, but I felt like I was able to let go of what had happened. I had the negative self-talk. You had to take the heaviest one. You didn't pay attention when like all that stuff. And then I finally came around to, okay, man, this is what you're doing. This is your buddy's 40th. Yeah. He's one of your favorite guys in the world, and this is your story for it. And
I love it. But that's the testament of mastery is when you view everything as a part of this epic adventure, everything becomes a part of that epic adventure. Yeah. And that's one of the flaws in the thinking of the pursuit of happiness as the ideal. If you seek out happiness and that's what you're striving for, anything that isn't that is a barrier, is an impediment. It's in the way. So happiness is a side effect. It's not the thing to seek. It's a side effect of pursuing meaning, of seeking connection, and you will develop it. But when you seek meaning, when you seek something greater, and you truly view life as this adventure to pursue a meaning, whatever your North Star, your compass is, and everything, losing a finger, it's all a cool story.
Yeah.
That's what life is. It's an epic adventure. View it that way and it becomes one.
Yeah, I love that too. I think about when I'm kind of quote unquote at my best, and I think about those things in the past and I'm about to do something, I'm like, I've fucking done this before. Like everything comes up roses for me. I got this. Like there's no fear. And when I'm in another state of mind, it's all the questions come in. You can't fucking do this. It's like, how can you even get started? And it's like, that's not a useful part of my history. It's, and again, was, the first example true? Well, it wasn't that moment. Was it exactly how it happened? Obviously not, as we know. How many different, movies did I watch to get to that?
Reconstruct that memory. Exactly.
Yeah. I want to talk about your trip across Antarctica.
Yeah.
So how did that, was it born out of your experience in Greenland and wanting to take it another layer, or?
So after Greenland, I struggled, as I mentioned, but once I came out of that abyss, wrote my book Fearvana, started building a business, I got back into pushing these edges physically. Got into ultra running and mountain climbing and a series of different outdoor sports. What drew me to polar travel is it is by far the most mental and physical suffering out of everything. It is not as dangerous as climbing mountains, but it's a lot more suffering.
And why do you say that? Is because you can fall off a mountain?
Exactly. Primary reason is you can fall. On a mountain, you're going up. So you can fall. As an example, when I was on Denali in Alaska, there's a ridge at 16,000 feet. It's so thin, 1 foot in front of the other, 1,000-foot drop on each side.
Fuck, it's gnarly.
It's gnarly. I mean, but when you're doing that, it was terrifying. Your mind is not wandering. You're thinking about that step. That's where your whole world is, that step. In Antarctica, on polar travel, it's flat white nothingness. Much of the journey in Antarctica, there were mountains for part of it, but much of the journey, there's not even stimuli. There's flat white nothingness. So what that does to the mind is it has the luxury to wander, which is also a tremendous burden, is when it wanders. But that's the beauty. So when you're doing that, like I said, unlike in mountaineering, not only is it puts you in flow because of the terrain, it's also dynamic. As you go up and down the mountain, the terrain is different, the views are different. You take rest days to acclimatize. In polar travel, every day is monotonously the same. And that's the spiritual mastery of why does monotony exist? Monotony exists because you have a reference of a past and a future. If you don't, there's no monotony.
Oh, well, even if it's like a minute ago. Yes.
Exactly.
Wow.
And I'm not, again, far from perfect at it.
No, but I just love that framing of it.
Exactly. So if you have no past, no future, you're only here, fully here. There's no monotony. And when you're in that region, the goal is to keep bringing it back to the now. There were 4 times. So in my journey, I ended up doing 500 miles, dragging a sled that started at 420 pounds over 60 days completely alone in Antarctica. Now, the goal was I was attempting to be the world's first person to cross Antarctica coast to coast with no dogs and no kites. And this had not only never been done before, it had never been attempted before. It's impossible. Actually, having done it, I would tell you it's impossible. And even polar explorers had said more than likely anyone who attempts this will fail. It's impossible. We don't believe it can be done, but let's strive for the impossible.
What do you have for rescue options when you're out there?
So there's a company called ALE, Antarctic Logistics and Expeditions. They organize all logistics for adventurers in Antarctica. So there's a main base camp in Antarctica called Union Glacier, where when I did eventually get evacuated, because what happened was I got diverticulitis.
Oh,
which is quite a painful.
Sounds super painful.
It was pretty gnarly. It was pretty.
How did you get it?
From what I understand, it's caused by tremendous stress. I was under a bit of it out there.
That's on brand.
I was under a bit of it, a tad bit.
Yes.
So after 60 days, I didn't know at the time it was diverticulitis. I found out later. I just felt the shooting, horrific pain in my gut that didn't go away. And eventually day 60, at that point, I already knew the crossing was no longer possible. It was about day 45 or day 48 that we knew that the crossing was no longer possible. The math was no longer feasible. I only had 115 days worth of time to do this.
Okay.
Because the Antarctic season, it starts going into Antarctic winter. So everybody has to get out.
Okay.
So I had 115 days worth of food and fuel and supplies dragging behind me in 2 sleds that initially weighed 420 pounds. It was the heaviest sled any man's dragged from the coast of Antarctica, uphill from day 1. So it was brutal.
Just why not?
Because I
have it
had
be
no choice,
uphill?
honestly. It had to. So you can either start on this coast or that coast. The other coast has 30 days worth of flat terrain before you start climbing, but the other coast is very hard to get to, and there was no good weather window to get there. So I had to start on this other coast, which meant a place called Berkner Island, which meant climbing from day one. And not only that, we got hit with an extraordinary amount of soft snow, more so than normal. I mean, there were three or four other adventurers attempting different records out there. We all failed.
Mhm.
Nobody hit it because the soft snow made things horrifically challenging. There was one day in particular, I remember where every 3 steps, the 2 sleds would get stuck in the snow. I would have to then battle them out, go up, get stuck again, and this would go on for 9 hours. There were 4 times on the expedition where I would break 20 kilometers on my daily distance. I would cross 20 kilometers, which is about 12, 13 miles. And that was what I needed. I was like, all right, sweet. I broke 20. And then that night it snowed. And the first time it happened, I hit 21.9 kilometers. And then it snowed so bad, my kilometers went from 21.9 to 17 to 14 to 13, putting in the same amount of hours, but just unable to move. And that was soul crushing. So talk about the spirituality of having to just, okay, this is what it is. I remember that 13 kilometer day. Usually I ski for about 50 minutes and I take a quick break, drinking water, eat some food, pee, keep going. That day on one break, I just sat on my sled. I looked up and I said, come on, give me a fucking break.
Yeah, come on, guy.
I was dying, but I had to stand back up and keep moving. And when that happened again, the second time, the third time, the fourth time, I break 20 and it snows. And you look out your tent and you see the soft snow. You know what's coming. But if your mind starts thinking that you have to do 9-10 hours of this, you're going to break. All right, let me just get out of my tent. I would trick myself. Let me just do one shift. Just one shift. And keep bringing it back into the now. Keep bringing it to the back of the now.
Oh, wow.
That's what makes polar travel so hard.
Deep practice.
Yeah. It's the mental side. I mean, I had some days where a one shift could feel like a lifetime and other shifts where it went by in an instant. I had some moments of absolute connection with the divine, pure bliss. I would be skiing and tears streaming down my face. I felt more connected paradoxically, even though I was completely alone, to my wife, to God, to earth, to all that is in this moment of Satori, awakening, just pure bliss. And then other moments where I was in hell on earth and just pure suffering. And that's one of the things that draws me to these adventures is in this microcosm of time, you get to feel the entire range of the human experience at a volume that's dialed up to 12, because everything is so amplified out there. The highs are high, the lows are low. Everything is amplified. And also because you get to feel that level of solitude, that level of suffering, it breaks down the walls. It sheds the constructs that shape our reality, and you get to experience pure experience. And that is profoundly beautiful. You open doors into the soul that are very rarely opened. And I love seeing what's on the other side of those doors, not just for myself, but to bring back and to be in conversations like this, to share with somebody who everybody's got their own Antarctica to cross. Everybody's battling their own storms.
I love that.
So if you share something, because I get to play on such an extreme edge, I get to battle bigger dragons and unearth bigger treasures.
Yes.
Right. And it's a privilege. I get to do that.
New levels, new devils.
Exactly. I love that.
Yeah.
I love that. And so you open new doors.
What you just described could have basically ad-libbed psychedelics. I feel like just the depths, the highs, the pure experience. Just like I was hearing you just say that, and I'm like putting myself in my experience. I've had a little bit of experience with some of those things, and I feel like that's why. Well, that's part of the reason I'm called to them, because there is I'm turning into a fear that I don't know what's going to happen.
Yeah.
There's a part of me that hopes for the best, somewhat prepares for the worst, but tries to let go and just be in the experience. And then when I'm in the experience, I have those moments of holding on too tight, and I get to feel what that feels like. And then in that experience, upon integration, I get to see what I learned. Oh, I was intending to surrender, but what I was doing was getting run over by the plant. Mm-hmm. And so that was not active surrender. I didn't find my center. I didn't find my breath. Mm-hmm. I didn't lean in. That's a big one.
Yeah.
I think about in my relationship. Am I finding my center?
Yeah.
Am I finding my breath?
Yeah.
Am I leaning in?
Yeah.
And I've learned so much. I've been so fortunate to have some incredible guides and facilitators that when those things happen, they get to reflect to me like what maybe some of the lessons are in that.
Yeah.
And then I get to show up the next night and have another drink of the tea.
Yeah.
And when those things start, they want to come on and give me the same, the night that I'm speaking of were two of the most terrifying experiences of my life.
Mm.
And I showed up for the third night, which everybody else did too.
Mm.
And it was coming on again. And I went back to finding my center, finding my breath, leaning in. And I kept wanting to, kind of let it blow me over because it was so intense. And I kept just repositioning and just showing up. And then finally, after maybe the 7th or 8th time, it was like I busted through this thing and it was like beautiful nirvana. Like I got to be in this incredible like playscape that was like, oh, that's why you stay in it for that kind of experience of novelty. And within that, like what is that for life? And if we can just stay in it and we can do all those things, like maybe we get to have an experience like today where we are one with it and we get to just be in the flow of whatever is happening. And surrendering doesn't mean laying down. It means being honest with what's happening and being better than good with it. Like this is what you're here for and to be here for the experience. So I just love, for some people who maybe won't have the opportunity to go across the ice cap, that maybe have had some experience with psychedelics. I just love that maybe lands for them as well. And there's countless other ways that, but this framework is so beautiful. It's like you go back, it's back to the contrast. And it's like, we have to have the contrast and hold both of those things.
Exactly.
Because that joy that I felt when I popped through wouldn't have been nearly as fulfilling if I hadn't experienced the night before.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Contrast.
And then I got to see the humanness and other of all the men in that circle who showed up for me. And so to your point, like in those moments when the fucking chips are down and it's like you're looking for a lifeline, look who shows up. Look at, oof.
Yeah.
It's that whole reframe that the universe is conspiring for you, that it's there for you if you allow it to be, and to trust. And so I just, thank you for taking me back to that moment. I appreciate that.
Beautiful to see the impact it had on you. Yeah. It's beautiful, man.
Yeah. Thank you. Whew.
Absolutely.
Okay.
It's really beautiful.
How about, have you had much experience with psychedelics?
I did a lot of drugs in my high school days, but that was by no means seeking consciousness. It's just to get fucked up. So
understood. I've been there too.
In these days, it's been more through the experiences of the darkness and the isolation. So darkness, you start seeing lights.
Yeah, tell me about that, because I've heard other people talk about it. I had Aubrey on the podcast, and he had shared, he'd just come out of his darkness.
I was on his podcast, and when he heard about the darkness, I had connected him to the place that I first went to the darkness retreat.
And I was the first podcast he went on when he came back from the darkness retreat.
So a lot of synergy.
Of course.
I had connected him to the group in Germany that he went to. That was the place where I went to as well. Yeah.
Tell me I know kind of what called you to that, but why darkness?
So the first time what called me to it, I had gone through this very challenging divorce, broke my sobriety, and went back into the pit. Did not like that about myself. And I recognized I had gotten really good at the doing, but I struggled with stillness. So I was pushing these edges physically. I'd run a lot of ultra marathons, but stillness was my great fear, coming back to the duality, right? So this is what I had to face. And I was originally going to go to a Vipassana, a 10-day silent retreat.
Yeah.
But I didn't know there was a thing like a darkness retreat. So while researching, I stumbled into this, and that called to me way more than a Vipassana.
Yeah. Because
in darkness, you're shutting off one of the primary ways in which we engage with the world, the visual sense. So when there's nowhere external to go, in even the simplest way, that's a wall. There's nowhere external to latch onto for your consciousness.
Yeah.
Where else do you go but within? And so I wanted to go within. And that's what called me the first time. And I remember the first 2 days in there, I was doing a lot of workouts. And then I realized I was working out to escape the stillness.
Oh, brother.
So
yeah.
I set a rule, no more working out, because
Yeah.
I was comfortable with that.
Yeah.
So I set a rule, no more working out, and just sat, which obviously was very uncomfortable.
Yeah.
But what I was saying earlier, you see these light shows. So it becomes like a psychedelic experience. You see lights that are as real as the brightest light I've actually seen was in that first time in my darkness retreat. It was so bright. I was going like this. I was shielding my eyes because it was blinding me.
And was that helpful, or was it actually?
No,
yeah, I was going to say, because it was.
Light.
Yeah,
exactly.
Okay, that's what I suspected, but I just wanted to make sure for the audience. For the audience,
it's a great question because it's a fair question. I mean, I obviously thought it would help. That's why I did it, right? So I thought that too. But I go like this, and then I was trying to touch my eyelids. I couldn't tell if they were closed or open, and it's the brightest light I've ever seen in darkness.
Do they? I've heard that it's potentially endogenous DMT that's being released.
I've heard too. Yeah,
but they haven't really been able to figure that out.
Yeah, and that's what I also stopped asking that question. You know, coming back to the duality and in our own evolution, like my first book, Fearvana, everything is research-based. Every point in there, I read hundreds of books backed by science. And not that there's anything wrong with that, but I went so far on that extreme, if you want to look at, and again, semantics aside, call it science and spirituality or the practical and the mystical, everything had to be practical and defended. Until in my own evolution, I started seeing that both of those can coexist and embracing the mystical. And the darkness, the first time I went in, was the great teacher in that other side of this duality to recognize that there was something mystical. I mean, I had a moment where I literally was lying on my bed. There was this whole light show above me, and my arms, it sounds crazy, but they were locked. I couldn't move. And it felt like I was moving. And later on, the lady who runs the darkness retreat told me I experienced the start of an astral projection, and my body and soul were moving somewhere. And I didn't go deeper. Like I don't know how long this lasted because I had no sense of time, but I can vividly remember not being able to move my arms. They were locked. Tears were coming down my face. And if I would start to disappear out of this, I just said, please God, help me go deeper. Please God, help me go deeper. And God knows how long it lasted, but eventually I came out of it. And I literally felt like my bed was moving and I was locked in place as if on some sort of rocket ship ride or something, you know?
Whoa.
And I don't know why. Call it what you want, call it crazy, but that's what I experienced. And that to me was as real as anything else. And that to me, those experiences recognize that there's mysticism in the universe. Not everything needs to be explained, and that's a beautiful thing.
Not to make meaning of it and try to sort it out.
And even to validate this to a brain that sought evidence for everything, what I started doing, again, I'm always looking for duality causing me friction, right? So to practice surrender and embracing mysticism, every time I had some experience, and we can all relate to this, you have some experience like, how did the stars align for that to happen? You know, like as in a concrete example, I was training for Antarctica and I went on an 8-hour tire dragging session all night in Arizona summer. It sucked, to say the least. Yeah. Dragging 2 very heavy tires. I didn't want to go. It was miserable. I was struggling. 1 hour in, I meet this woman who had an Arctic wolf dog. It has half Arctic wolf. An Arctic wolf is what I consider my spirit animal in Arizona. When do you ever see that? That's the first and last time in my entire life I've seen an Arctic wolf dog. And many people stop me when I'm tire dragging because it's weird. And they ask me what I'm doing. But very rarely do they go deep into the spirituality of it. This woman went to the spirituality of it. She had this Arctic wolf dog that somehow, like, I just connected to my soul. It's literally what I perceive to be in my spirit animal. And when I did lots of drugs, I would see a wolf every time. Wow. Not once I not see one. And so among other reasons why I resonate with the Arctic wolf. But I saw that. And I remember I would write down in a book, this happened. So I was stacking evidence to validate mysticism, if that makes sense. Yeah. So for a rational, practical brain to embrace this other thing that at first was very uncomfortable, I needed to justify it until I could accept it and it became normal.
Oh, I love that. How do you like kind of walk the line almost? Maybe that's not the right phrase, but you have all these challenges, these edges you want to find. How do you keep it so it's not performative and it's in service to something greater? And sometimes is it performative and it's hard to decide. And it's just back to, it's just business. It is what it is.
That's a great question. There are times where I absolutely do it for ego. and I'm not unaware of that. I think the key is bringing the awareness of it, because it's not the core reason why I do these things, but it's a weapon in a moment of need. So sometimes when I'm really struggling, I'll tap into I'm the greatest, strongest motherfucker alive. And it's irrelevant whether that's true or not. That's not the point. But it's fuel in the moment. Or I'll think about potentially, I could get on a Joe Rogan podcast or something, right? Yeah. And so, but that's not the core reason I do it, but it's a tool in a moment of need. In a moment of the pain cave, there's multiple different tools. There's many different. Actually, feel free to check out on Fearvana. There's a tool that I give away called the 25 different weapons to navigate the pain cave. And this is not just physical pain, but emotional, mental pain. And sometimes these weapons are exactly the opposite. So sometimes, for example, I'll listen to music to do everything I can to escape the pain I'm feeling.
Yes.
Other times, when I'm feeling the pain, I'll go deeper into it. And I'll actually call forth more pain. These are two opposite weapons, but they both have their place. Yes. This is the paradox of the human experience, coming back to what we said. But it's not that one is bad, other is good. So ego, to do great things, you have to have an ego.
Yes, sir.
But if you live in that ego, like anything, now even with comfort, we've taken this paradigm that sometimes you'll see comfort is the enemy. Comfort's not the enemy. Too much comfort is bad.
Yeah.
Just like too much discomfort. The reason discomfort is valuable is because of comfort.
Yeah, saying the ego is that you have to live in ego in order to live in soul, spirit.
Exactly.
And then,
I mean, humility and ego can coexist. And the greatest in the world are shining examples of this. Yeah. Listen to Kobe Bryant talk. There was quote unquote ego, but it wasn't ego. He just knew he was the best. But if you really go deep, that man was a relentless learner. He was always looking for that next gap. Where's that next gap? I even spoke to Larry Fitzgerald once, a great footballer.
Yes,
right.
Absolutely.
And I asked him, what separates the legends from those who are just great? And he said, the willingness to look for the gap. So they're the truly the greats. They have the humility, but the ego, and those two forces, they can coexist. That's the key, right? So embracing both those forces, and through self-awareness, recognizing if you're going too far off one edge. And if I'm being consumed by ego, hey, and that's practice like anything else. Yes. You stop, recognize, you pause, and you see what's happening. You pause those second darts.
Yeah.
And then you can decide, I'm going too far on this edge.
Yeah.
Got it. Let me go be with the other edge. Let me experience the other edge.
Yeah, I've been there. Yeah, it's just it happens.
Exactly. We're all human. I'm far from perfect at this process.
Here I go again. I thought I had this solved. It's like, no, dude, you don't got this solved. You're just not in it for a while. I love that. By the way, side note, you brought up Joe Rogan. I got to mention this, right, Linz? Yesterday, I found out I was on the Joe Rogan Experience. There was a clip from the podcast that they showed over the weekend.
Dude, that's so badass. That's so sick.
How cool is that?
That's so cool.
So anyway, you mentioned it. Of course you mentioned it today, right? It's like the only time anyone's ever mentioned the Rogan Experience.
Synergy, brother. Exactly. Stars aligning, right?
All right, so what's next for you?
Right now, focusing on being with my wife.
How's that feel? Yeah. You ready for that?
Yeah, being present with my wife. We're working on 2 books. One that I'll be the sole author on, called Step Into the Storm, around some of the things we're talking about. How do you keep doing hard things and move through that next edge? And the other one, co-authoring with my wife. She's the primary author, around helping people, high performers especially, find and create beautiful relationships, thriving relationships. How do we thrive at the pursuit of a craft while creating a beautiful relationship? My wife and I we met 2 months later, got engaged, 5.5 months, got married, 2 years we've been together and have in absolutely incredible relationships. Yes, of course, we have hard times. We have hard conversations. It's not that we steer clear of them. Even after coming back from Antarctica, I wanted to go back instantly.
Yeah.
That was a hard conversation.
Yeah.
So we move through it with great peace. We don't yell. We don't fight in that sense. We have difficult disagreements, but we move through with peace. And so we built something beautiful over 2 years of being together and 1.5 years of being married. And now, so we want to share as I mentioned, I think earlier, right? Like the 2 paths to create meaning, purpose, and connection. So you have to do hard things to find your purpose, to live that purpose fully, and connection, the relationship. So we're going to co-author these 2, co-author 1 book and I'll write the other. And just sharing more of the lessons I've been blessed to learn over the years.
Oh, I love that y'all are doing that. I tell you, it was something that would have been really useful for me. Still will be, I'm sure. But like when I was in my pursuit of whatever I was after, I did it without connection, and I didn't understand I went it alone and I had to do the thing. And it not only created separation with me and my wife, but a lot of fear in her, like what's going on with you? Because she didn't know, because I wasn't explaining. And on some level, there was nothing to fear. I was just curious about what I meant to do here.
Yeah.
It had in some ways nothing to do with our relationship, but at the same time, I was completely disconnected and I had no idea. I was doing the best I could.
Yeah.
And so to have a framework to be able to hold that and bring her in, and likewise for her on her journey to bring me in. Wow, I haven't heard of anything like that before. And I think so many high performers struggle with that. And there's a lot underneath that, whether it's the provider complex or in how we identify and how much we have invested in that identity and how we think it's supposed to look, where it's like, oh yeah, you're not just providing financially, like you need to provide connection. And what does that look like? And, it's, I'm excited for you all to write that.
Thank you, brother. Yeah. I mean, to your point, to be a high performer, you have to be an obsessive at your craft. And so I can understand the challenge of, this is blinkers on, but what we want to show is that it is possible. I mean, while I was training for Antarctica, 2 days after we got married, we went to Alaska for 3 months, lived in a tiny remote cabin so I could train, but she joined me. She was supporting us financially. Every dollar I was making, I was putting back towards the crossing. We had to raise $1.1 million to pull this off. It was monstrously expensive.
Whoa.
Yeah.
Wow.
So we were going through the challenges of raising all this money. We spent 3 months in Alaska, 7 weeks in Norway. I had gone to Iceland for a training expedition, then Greenland. Then she joined me in Chile, which was the final dropping point before I went to Antarctica. So I was barely home last year, both of us. And so she joined me while running her business and making money, funding life. I kind of joked that my job title was Explorer and Sugar Baby.
Hell yeah.
It was great.
Oh, I love it. All right. So where can people find you?
So you can find me at Fearvana, Fearvana on Instagram. I share all the lessons, the book Fearvana on Amazon, paperback, Kindle, Audible, and on fearvana.com, the website. I mentioned some of the resources to guide people through various phases of the journey, wherever they are.
Awesome. And we'll link to all that stuff in the show notes. And oh gosh, it's better than I even thought. Like, I'm so grateful Josh made the connection for us, and you were flexible with the timing that we got to move it. Yeah.
Brother. Yeah.
Thank you. It's really a pleasure. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for having me. Truly an honor.
Yeah.